Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that. You can explain why the tide goes in.
Tide goes in, tide goes out.
See, the water, the tide comes in and it goes out.
We do understand the tides. The tides are part of the 4% we understand. So Bill O'Reilly is giving a list of things that are fully understood. If he had given a list of things that are not understood, okay, that would be a different reaction. And it would be less susceptible to comedic mockery than saying, tides come in and out, you can't explain that. It's like, yes, we can. We've known that one for the last couple of 100 years.
Well, it happened. By sheer coincidence, the same day I took off for my own vacation, Bill O'Reilly's was extended permanently. The powers that be at News Corp and their infinite compassion determined that Bill-O was to advertisers as the suck-faced crawly thing from Alien was to humans. Not the one that bursts out of your chest, the other one. Anyway, the second pillar of the Bill and Roger Cathedral of conservatism crumbled. Fox News lost its superstar and the Bill O'Reilly saga concluded. They're there. Not to worry, folks. If a single tear ever does force its way down O'Reilly's splotchy cheek, he'll be able to dry it with the stack of $25 million he'll be receiving in severance. He'll also be able to look forward to his podcast because, well, he has a podcast now. You know, like Lewayne and me. I was headed to Colorado with my girl when the news broke officially. It wasn't a surprise, really, if you follow the right Twitter handles. The young Murdoch eye were split with Papa Murdoch on O'Reilly, and the advertisers were stampeding for the exits. The decision was brisk and final, a pleasing confirmation of our suspicions from last episode. Our trip to Colorado was ostensibly about going to the Science March in Denver. That and nature stuff and whatever else you can find to do high up in the mountains. On our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/swingstateshow, we've been selling the Science March since before the beginning. The final attendance figures won't touch the Women's March. It will take some doing to ever top that outing. But it was yet another instance of a new and persisting phenomenon in the United States. Another massive global wave of protests took place across 600 cities and all 7 continents. This time, it was for a cause near and dear to my heart, literally, because the blood cells pumping through it contain a genetic flaw that makes them prone to clotting. It was the cause of science, otherwise known as evidence-based knowledge and/or a method of systematically obtaining it, which is entirely and exclusively built upon facts, not wishes, hopes, or metaphysical want to. Just facts. The scene in Denver was a beauty. Perfect weather. A great crowd that stayed long into the afternoon. The police put the kibosh on beer sales, but it didn't dampen the mood any. The sign makers and chicks in lab coats and multi-faith speakers and stoners all had one unifying theme as they marched and chanted and swapped stories. It's time for science and data to guide policy rather than men with fables, confabulated myths, and other forms of pseudoscience, pseudo-history, and plain old-fashioned ignorance. I'm not the first to notice that the fact that we need a science march at all is disturbing. Our entire civilization and everything in it is in one way or another directly predicated on scientific advancement. Every gadget, gizmo, phone, space shuttle, medical miracle, suntan lotion, sports channel, headache pill, and water purifier in existence today, and all the ones to be made tomorrow, depend on it. It's no small wonder, then, that we live in a society where the dominant governing party, the Republican Party, in case you forgot, simply disbelieves or disregards the body of evidence on climate change. Or that something like 4 in 10 Americans believe man roamed the earth with dinosaurs 10,000 years ago. The Science March never pretended to be apolitical. That's a word conservatives love to use while moaning about politics. The imagined safe space where political opinions, let alone accountability for outcomes, are banished. You can call it what you want. A generational divide, a new progressivism, the ancient trench war of reason against ignorance, but the resurgent demand that science trump the ideologies and interests of private companies and oil conglomerates is political. And that's a good thing. It's a necessary thing. Because how our nation chooses to chart a course with regards to our science policy is exactly what Bill Nye and Neil Tyson have been running around screaming about. The economy and discoveries of the future, where we are all going to spend the remainder of our time on one fragile mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam, to borrow a phrase from Carl Sagan. All of this was sort of rattling around in my head while I soaked in the day, or did my civic duty, as one friend put it. For some reason, throughout the day, I kept thinking about Bill O'Reilly. Mr. Straight Shooter, the man several million conservative-leaning viewers tuned into each night for a bold, fresh truth-teller who positioned himself as the lone guardian, quote, looking out for the folks in a world full of sharks and cons and liberals. Although he wasn't alone in the embarrassing prevaricating on climate change coming out of Fox. Recently, his replacement Tucker Carlson whined that Bill Nye the Science Guy was a bully because he holds the right wing accountable for their bullshit. I have to give Tucker points for creativity there. I don't think Bill Nye could bully a houseplant. Like on every other subject, Bill O and Fox News was nothing but a repository of bluster and bullshit when it came to the issue of science. As is Rush Limbaugh, as is Mark Levin, as is Michael Savage, etc., et al. Theirs is a world where professional men and women don't collect and analyze data to reach consensus, say, on the consequences of man-made climate change, but manufacture liberal data and conspire to appease their leftist doctrines. On the more bizarre side of the conspiracy spectrum, believed only by the most batshit lunatic morons, climate change is a hoax invented by the Chinese. To a young Earth creationist, evolution is an invention of Satan himself, a lie crafted to make believers doubt the so-called Word of God. Because the idea of descent with modification is far-fetched, but a story about a talking snake convincing a couple of kids to eat an enchanted apple is more than probable. It's the capital T, truth. And this is the reason that the March for Science was, I think, a critical moment. Like the first few strictly atheist candidates entering politics at the state level, it's important that our activism remind us that the causes we're in the streets for really do matter. What the March for Science reminded me is that, in the end, much of our political strife is just a manifestation of the information war. Whether it's evolution, climate change, vaccines, or Bill O'Reilly, it's just another move in the same game. Ignorance and superstition versus solid reasoning. Fact versus fiction, and the human condition which never allows any individual ape to ever completely escape the bullshit in their own head. But we can get better, slowly, grudgingly, with effort. And the March on Science in Denver, and all the rest around the world, confirmed just how many people are ready and willing to advance the cause.
The sleep of reason brings forth monsters.
I'm a whiner, and I keep whining and whining until I win.
Maybe somebody will rise up.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty.
Welcome to Swing State, an aggressive, progressive, critical, and political podcast from the middle of the Midwest. Welcome back to Swing State. It's post 100 days, and the country is, as of 10:30 this morning, still standing. I'm Lewayne.
I'm AJ.
And we're going to talk about stupid people today. AJ mentioned Bill O'Reilly and science in his Broadside. The sort of theme that ties those two together is that people are stupid, and it was necessary to even have this fucking science protest, and Bill O'Reilly is part of the reason people are stupid.
I think I would maybe insert here that I would delineate between the words stupid and ignorant. And there's a further one between stupid and ignorant and actively misinformed. There are actually 3 categories of ignorance you could possibly fall in just in the scope of this conversation.
You're giving them far more benefit than I guess I did. You're right there. In this case, many of the people that we talk about in this are tragically misinformed. Bill is one of those guys who's been very good about doing that while he still had a career.
Yeah, and speaking of being tragically misinformed, we can throw Bill O'Reilly right into that conversation. It's the blind leading the blind kind of scenario.
Yes. Have you actually read any of his books?
I think at one point, maybe about 10 years ago, I read, it was like The O'Reilly Factor, whatever the book was called.
One of his collection books?
Yeah. I honestly can't remember much about it except for one story where Bill O'Reilly, he claimed that he always rode in coach because he didn't do the first class thing.
Really?
I would have to run that down. But you know what? Here's the thing. Bill O'Reilly said a lot of things about himself that he did. Bill O'Reilly had a lot of claims about his own worldview and morality and the superiority of it against, any and all alternate concepts or philosophies.
Yeah, I actually do remember you making the comment, and I think I even referenced this before when we were talking about Bill, that you said that his stuff was worth the price of admission. Even if you didn't agree with him, it was worth watching because it was a show. And that's actually the problem we run into, and I think part of it is this sort of competition that we have in terms of information, because one of the things that the left in particular has always been sort of weak on is having a comparable version of somebody like O'Reilly or Rush or any of those guys. I mean, they tried Air America several years ago. The problem is the left is hindered by the need to be sort of factual about stuff. So what you end up with is somebody like O'Reilly or Alex Jones or these guys who just spout whatever ridiculous shit they want, and the guys on NPR who talk about this sort of thing and that sort of thing, and they tell you about feelings and information and they don't get you riled up. They don't get you fired up. Rush and O'Reilly and all these guys, they trade on anger, and that unfortunately makes people behave badly and foolishly, but it also gets them to pay attention.
This is an argument about rhetoric that goes back to like ancient Greece. This is, this is Aristotle, like pathos, ethos, and logos, the forms of argument, and the right wing has pathos nailed down. They have if you ever turn into, Mark Levin, you're met with a screaming Kermit the Frog voice. Within like 10 minutes, the guy will fire himself up about this or that, and it will work into another conspiracy. And before long, he's screaming at the caller, you big dummy, you big dope, get off the phone, that's the traditional American values. And you have people who just listen to this day after day after day. And for whatever reason, this is a human characteristic. This is why I want to actually parse between stupid and ignorant, because it is human nature to just sort of listen to the thing that gives you the little buzz that makes you feel good, that you want to hear, and then tune out everything else. The problem is when that happens with guys like Bill O'Reilly and Rush Limbaugh and Mark Levin and anybody else Roger Ailes hired or anything to do with, and he had a lot to do with both Limbaugh and O'Reilly, you get people who are extremely upset for extremely poor reasons a lot of the time.
It sort of taps into the thing everybody credited with regard to Trump, the angry white person who feels like they've been ignored and neglected. So I get that. I mean, it's easier to cause a riot than it is to have an intelligent conversation. It is easier because there's no requirement for reality to be a factor. You don't have to do anything except to appeal to emotion. And the more you can do that, the less you have to worry about appealing to the intellect, because that's what's driving it. One of the champions of that of late was Alex Jones with InfoWars and some other bullshit websites. He was responsible for the Pizzagate story, which I know we've referenced before, that there was this child sex trafficking thing under this pizza place in fucking DC, and
didn't happen.
And there was certainly no question that it didn't happen, because some guy went into the pizza place armed, ready to free these kids.
Batman shows up and there's no Joker.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. But Jones, oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, because he's a fucking lunatic, but he was in a custody fight with his ex-wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife, and his lawyer basically announces as his defense for his behavior that he's playing a character. My first thought was, I don't know that that's the case. I mean, I know that we had that conversation before about some of these right-wing talk guys that I think to some degree, I don't know how much they actually believe what they say. And maybe he doesn't believe any of it. The problem is he's made a career out of saying shit like that. So he has to, even if he wants to argue that he's just playing a character, he still has to do what I think he basically did, which is, I mean, it's just an exaggeration. I really do actually, these things are all true, because you can't call something InfoWars and tell everybody that you're telling the truth and then say, yeah, I was just bullshitting you for money, even though he was just bullshitting them for money. Now, the thing that sort of freaked me out about this more when I looked into Jones's story, and why this is actually something I come back to. During testimony, I don't really watch Jones's stuff. I've heard him and I've seen some of his shit and whatever.
Me either. Yeah, no.
But apparently he records from home, which means his kids are privy to the shit that he's saying. So whether he believes it or not, his kids have been exposed to it. And when I was talking to AJ about this off mic earlier, I had pulled up an article on The Hill that sort of summarized what was going on with Jones. And the thing that sort of killed me about this was, because The Hill, like most stuff on the internet, has ads along, the side of the page. This one, I sort of had to laugh at, because it was for an organization called CASA, which is Court-Appointed Special Advocates. These are volunteer people who serve as the eyes and ears of the court in cases involving child neglect and abuse. That is probably one of the best coincidental ads I think I've ever seen show up on a page. I'm not going to get into the full depth of CASA here on the podcast, but I will include a link to the website, because it's an organization I think you should know about. Of course, I think that because I am in fact a CASA and have been, and it was interesting for it to pop up in this context.
A little delicious coincidence to start the day.
Yeah, it was. But, one of the things we were talking about when we were going back and forth, not just on this show, but in others, when it came to guys like this playing a character.
The one thing that I've always stopped short at is as accepting that, because I've heard that explanation that this person X is just playing a character. I've heard it about Rush. I've heard it about Bill O'Reilly. I've heard it about just about all of the right-wing talking heads. And for me, it always comes down to, like, I think Occam's razor may be applicable here. You know, don't multiply assumptions beyond more than you need. Once again, I am a profound believer in stupidity and ignorance. And propaganda and denial and cognitive dissonance. I believe these things are in themselves often completely sufficient to explain much of what you're seeing, because the other person that I've heard is just playing a character, and I kept hearing it and kept hearing it and kept hearing it, was Donald Trump.
Yes.
They said that behind this chaotic mask of a moron is some razor-sharp, savvy business guy who is just going to absolutely flank everybody with his genius, and he's going to usher in this, that, and the next thing. Well, come to find out, no, there wasn't. There was just the blustering blowhard there appeared to be.
Well, and that's one of the things, because specifically that he was a savvy businessman. And I don't think if you look at his history that's borne out. Is he good at accumulating money? Yes, sure. Is he good at running business? No, he's not. He's bankrupted like a dozen.
And he does not appear to have any managerial skill at all. Like, as far as running organizations, everything that he is around or associated with, including his administration today, it is a disaster zone. He can't fill appointments. He can't fill people. If he were running the hotel, he probably couldn't keep the rooms clean because he couldn't keep staff there, because the main thing Trump knows how to do is watch TV and bluster.
Right.
That is his primary skill set. And if you can do those two things and you're already extremely rich, there may even be a way to turn that to your profit, as we found out with Trump's basically his whole career.
The thing about that, though, I think you used the word managerial somewhere in there, as in he is not.
Yeah, no, he is not at all.
His managerial style apparently seems to be to point to a manager and tell them to do shit. I think he's just accustomed to, this is what I want to do, make it happen. I don't think he actually does anything. And I don't think he bothers to, it's not even a matter of I don't think. He is clearly not bothered to be informed about anything he's doing.
No, and he works in an environment where he personally, in front of his staff, I'm sure, will not take responsibility for anything. Not anything. Not if a policy blows up, not if he's caught lying on camera. It's somebody else's fault. I mean, that speaks to the managerial aspect of the presidency. You have to be able to manage egos. You have to be able to manage people. You have to be able to manage time. There are all kinds of things you have to be able to do, and you need to be basically competent in whatever field you're happening to find yourself in as a manager, whether it's a restaurant or the White House. We're talking about the information problem in the country. Trump is what I would say, he is a victim of the low information culture that we have.
Sure. It would be hard not to view him as a victim, at least in some respect, because he's been able to get by that way, and he hasn't had to worry about it. The problem is, it's all great to look at that and go, well, haha, isn't it funny? But he's in the White House now.
Which is interesting, considering that we have maybe the most damaging bit of speech from Trump yet, which is saying something. But to me, this response to a question that he got in a Reuters interview, there was a little bit where he said something that was just so intuitively wrong to me, so damaging, that I don't see how a person could say this in public and then carry on in the capacity that they have. And the quote is Trump saying, "I love my previous life. I had so many things going. This is more work than in my previous life. I thought it would be easier."
He thought it would be easier.
He thought it would be easier. The presidency of the United States, he thought it would be easier.
I really think he just thought he was going to get to sit in the Oval Office and tell people to do shit. I don't think it occurred to him that he was going to have to, well, one, know things, and two, do things. People have made a lot about how much golfing he fucking does.
About 1/5 of his time is spent on the golf course. I'm just saying. I'm not even one that beats this issue, but considering Republicans love to talk about it, 1/5 of his time is spent on the golf course so far.
At a shitload of expense to us.
Yes.
Some of which he's going to get because it goes to Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, he's golfing on his own properties on our dime. So anyway, okay.
There, we've addressed that. Fine, whatever. In that Reuters thing, there are other conversations he has, other questions he answers, things where he's talking about world-changing decisions that he could be making, and he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, which is something we've obviously come back to before. Because when he was asked about North Korea, I'm not going to try and do the quote because I don't do it as well as you do, but he said that there was a chance we could end up having a major, major conflict with North Korea.
Which is just what I'm sure the country wants to hear, relaxing on a weekend or whatever.
Right.
I'm sure that's just what working guys want to hear.
If he were someone who were informed anything about national politics, why would he even think that? Why would he even say that? Why would it even be something that comes up?
Even if he believed it, why would he say it? If he thought it was true and maybe even imminently true. That is a message that absolutely needs to be put through the paces of your administration. You have a press secretary, you have people who are media experts. If you need to inform the country that there is a likely conflict coming with the nuclear power, there's an escalation towards that point, that is official messaging. That is not something you just fly off the handle and talk about like a fucking idiot. Because everyone in the world, including our allies, including our enemies, are paying attention.
But that's just it. We criticize his shoot from the hip Twitter fiasco way of dealing with shit, because that's not how you do shit. The problem is, if you asked a lot of his supporters, that's what they wanted. That's why they voted for him. Because he just, what's the popular way of putting it? He says what he thinks, something to that effect, assuming he thinks, I guess. He doesn't have a filter, I guess, is sort of what they get to. He just says what he means. Well, great, but what he means is he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing.
Well, and right here I'm just thinking of like Morgan Freeman in Seven telling Brad Pitt like, oh yeah, it's real impressive to just see a guy feeding off his emotions. No restraint, no discipline, no nothing. You just, oh, there is a problem. I have an id type squirting reaction to it. Some chemical spurts in my brain and I go, no, I'm going to tweet. And you potentially start a war in doing so. I mean, I'm just saying, this is dangerous behavior. If the president says the wrong thing at the wrong time and the wrong person hears it, takes it the wrong way, things can get out of hand even if you don't intend them to.
Because let's be honest, regardless of the context in which he's saying something, whether it's fucking Twitter or in a Reuters interview, what he says, whether he means it or not, is U.S. policy as far as the world is concerned. Because that's the information he's sharing. The thing that I find sort of infuriating, well, there's a lot of things I find infuriating about it.
Yeah, take a number, right?
But one of the things everybody used to bitch about when Hillary was running, and whenever the subject of a female president ever came up, was, oh yeah, but she's going to want to start a war like every 28 days. Because she's a woman, you know, oh my God, she's having her period, she's crabby, she's going to launch. Yeah. And I find myself thinking, but you're talking about a guy who could literally fucking start a war off of Twitter. That's even less rational. First of all, the first thing is a ridiculous stereotype, and it's meant to demean women.
But in the second case, you are quoting a man who is on tape as saying, I love war, in a way. I'm all about war. You're worried about Clinton starting war every 28 days, but not the guy standing there saying, I love war, I love the military, yay, beat the drum.
Yeah, somehow that seemed like a better choice. I hate to keep back to North Korea, but it's probably an easy microcosm of everything else. Because I think we could all agree, we were talking about this before, none of us like North Korea. This, you know, we don't have any particular love for North Korea. The difference is we recognize that what a war would mean in that peninsula is untold fucking carnage, not just for the North Koreans, not just for the South Koreans, but U.S. military personnel that are at the DMZ, because, as you may recall, we have a ceasefire between North and South Korea, which means we still have a military presence in case it ever becomes not a ceasefire.
Well, and then let's not kid ourselves. If the North Koreans have a nuclear device that they can explode, it is possible to move that device from place to place. You could stick it on a boat and just hope it floats to the right place on the western seaboard of the United States. I mean, that is a potential strategy. You should not be feeling at ease about a person poking this particular beehive. This is seriously dangerous. And yes, I mean, the North Koreans probably only have, 7, 8, 10 nukes. But that's a lot of dead people if they all go off and they're in target-rich, environments.
One of the things that sort of flabbergasts me about this as well is the likelihood that North Korea can fucking touch us personally, the United States, seems pretty minimal. But
not impossible.
Not impossible. But
not worth finding out in Los Angeles.
No, certainly not. But on the same note, we have a lot of people we associate with in that region who would probably not appreciate getting nuked because they're going to be in range.
Oh, including one of our single biggest trade partners in China. Mentioning that, you guys like Walmart? Like, there's not going to be a Walmart left if half of China's in flame.
And they apparently must have asked him about whether or not he thought Kim Jong-un was a rational person, because his response was, as to whether or not he's rational, I have no opinion on it. I hope he's rational.
Oh, and then he also said he'd be honored to meet with him. What the fuck is that?
Yeah, I don't know what the fuck that is either.
You'd be honored to meet with a totalitarian dictator?
Well,
I guess he would. I mean, yeah.
I was going to say he's pretty fond of the one in Russia, but
he likes Duterte in the Philippines. He likes the Fat Un in North Korea. He likes, I'm guessing he likes Xi Jinping, because that's a communist state. He likes Vladimir Putin. We know that. Holy crap, does he have a hard-on for Vladimir Putin. He probably likes Vladimir Putin the best because Putin is like, he's the gangster that's just content to steal. You know, he doesn't have to have, like, the total control of society. He just likes to make himself really, really fucking rich. Which is probably why Donald Trump likes him.
Yeah, which is, I think, is the thing that Trump should probably appreciate more than anything.
But the reason I bring all that up is not just to be snarky and cynical. It's to say, legitimately, the United States is losing our ability to say that we stand for human rights. You have to understand what the president, you know, sorry, yeah, he won. I mean, maybe not my president, hashtag or whatever, but nevertheless, he does occupy the seat, and he does sort of set our global agenda in a way. And right now, it appears as if the United States has a leader that loves dictators and hates freedom. It's just to kind of go along with that. The other day, Priebus was in an interview, and apparently they had looked into seeing about getting more libel laws to tighten up the First Amendment because Trump just can't handle criticism in the media. That's the short version of that story. Of course, it failed, but
they were looking into it. That alone should be a problem.
Understand the mentality we're talking about. We have an authoritarian-minded person in office. That's not a happy place to be.
The thing that sort of bothers me about that when you were talking about the adjustment of free speech, because that's basically what we're talking about, whether it's just libel laws or whether it's literally amending or doing anything to the First Amendment. The fact that this same group of people who would be super pissed off if you were going to amend anything that might potentially suggest they can't have a fucking anti-aircraft gun of their own don't seem fazed by, yeah, you're not going to be allowed to say what you want. You can't criticize this guy. Because the handful of people I happen to have interacted with regard to that free speech subject, they seem completely unfazed by it. In fact, one of them basically said, well, as long as I still have my Second Amendment rights, I don't care.
We're dealing with a type of ignorance that's so profound. It's almost character defining at that point.
It is. And that's sort of what we were talking about here. But that particular, I think it was a Facebook reply that I saw, where basically the Second Amendment over the First Amendment. There is an argument to be made that part of the reason that you have that particular group of people who support the right is because the left is ignoring them. And I can understand that because the left shouldn't be ignoring them, but it's also hard to look at them and go, yes, I'm going to take your concerns about not being able to have enough fucking guns seriously.
As seriously as we'll come to something in our next segment when we talk about folks fleeing the state of Iowa because of basic services for their special needs children not being available.
Can't get enough Swing State in your life? Follow us on Twitter at swingstate_show. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/swingstateshow. Check out back episodes, our blog, and whatever other things don't fit on the podcast at swingstateshow.wordpress.com. That includes links to past episodes and individual broadsides on YouTube. If you want to send us love notes or hate mail, shoot it to swingstateshow@gmail.com. Thanks to all of you who listen, share, and comment. We really appreciate it. Now, back to the show.
So there was an article in the Des Moines Register this week. It was actually a letter to the editor by a woman named Jessica Skoglund. I believe that's the pronunciation. For us, it just kind of encapsulates the situation in Iowa, and I think you'll understand after I read the letter. So here's Jessica. As I start to pack up my house and leave Iowa, I have mixed emotions. 2 years ago, moving was not an option. However, after budget cuts to the Des Moines Public Schools, my soon-to-be husband's job was cut to part-time. As a master's-level teacher with 16 years of service, no other options were available. As a mother who adopted a special needs child from the Iowa Department of Human Services almost 3 years ago, I cannot continue to see the same system that failed him continue to fail him. With Governor Terry Branstad cutting the DHS budget yet again, my son will continue to be on a waiting list for services. The letter we received last week informed us there are more than 650 children waiting for the Children Mental Health Waiver, and it will be 2.5 to 3 years before my son's number comes up. My son qualifies for these services, and these services would improve his day-to-day function. But corporate tax breaks appear to be the current priority, not the future of Iowa's children. This is not the Iowa I grew up in or the Iowa I want for my children. We chose to move where family can support our son and offer us support. It will take a village to raise my son, and the Republican Party of Iowa is not the village we are looking for. You could say that's even putting it mildly. That's understating the cause a bit. The GOP has just been at war with the people of this state, open war. Whether we're talking about collective bargaining or freezing the minimum wage at the state level, meaning that local cities, towns, mayors, whatever, they cannot raise the minimum wage even if they have a mind to do so. Here we find in this article that somebody is feeling they need to leave the state because they can't get services for their special needs kid, while we are cutting the budget for the Department of Human Services and we are extending massive tax breaks to corporations.
Just in going back to the editorial you just read, not just budget cuts to DHS, but the whole reason that this was initiated for this family was budget cuts to the Des Moines Public Schools. This is a master's level teacher who is now leaving this state to go somewhere else. Now, he may teach somewhere else, in which case our loss is some other state's gain.
Also, if he's from this state, the investment you spent in educating him is
out
now
the window.
leaving and going somewhere else.
Or he's going to go somewhere else and not be a teacher anymore, and which case not only does Iowa lose, but wherever he goes also loses. The problem I've run into when it comes to Republican politics for a while, but certainly since the rise of Trump, is that the Republican Party has made it clear they don't give a shit about anybody. And yet they continue to be supported by constituents. And I'd like to think that there's some reason for it, but I just don't get it. How do you have a party that tells you, tough shit, you don't get to pay people more just because you want to pay people more?
Well, meanwhile, all of the Iowa talk radio people and the national ones are screeching about socialism and big government and regulation. And then in this state, we have a governor decide for every county and every town and every city that the minimum wage shall not rise above what it is now, even if the people in that community determine it should be otherwise. That is insane. You cannot believe the small government line of bullshit and support this governor. You cannot be a Republican and a conservative in this state. I'm sorry.
You can't, because the whole hampering of collective bargaining was done by legislation. You know, Trump had this thing about for every regulation you add, you had to get rid of 2 of them, which is stupid as fuck.
The cat in the hat rule. Or
it doesn't make any fucking sense. I mean, that's how you stop your grandma from being a fucking hoarder. That doesn't make any sense. The collective bargaining, that has to be done by legislation. The budgets, those are legislative. You have to increase regulation to do the things they're doing. You had to create a law that says nobody gets to fucking raise the minimum wage. You had to create a law that says you don't get to bargain for anything but your fucking wages.
Rather than a market of different towns and areas that are more rural, more urban, more population, less population, more demand for work, less demand for work, higher wage, lower wage, instead of allowing that sort of natural process to occur with, a basic cutoff that can go up or down depending on where we are as a civilization, we're just going to get the one where it's no. You may not raise it regardless of the reason.
It doesn't matter that your city could afford to do that. It doesn't matter that your county is perfectly happy to do it. It doesn't matter that the people in your county want to do that.
Exactly. And it's not like, look, I know that this isn't saying that you can't pay somebody over $7.25. I mean, that's not the regulation. But the fact that your town can't say, you know what, in this town, let's say, Knoxville, Iowa, we're going to make sure that nobody's making less than $10 an hour, because if you're making $10 an hour, you can afford one of the cheaper apartments in town and a car payment. I mean, just some arbitrary way of thinking about the overall amount somebody would be making in a 40-hour job at $10 an hour. You may not have those conversations now. No reason to.
You can't. The legislative change that involved collective bargaining is the same thing. The market doesn't determine any of this. The union and the employer don't get to have a conversation about any of this stuff. They don't get to say, hey, this is something we like to agree to. We respect our employees enough that this is what we're going to do for them. You don't get to do that. Tough shit. You, as the union person, you get to negotiate your wages, and that's it. And everything else is up to the whim of your employer. So I hope you have one that actually respects you as a human being, because if not, you're fucked.
At the beginning of the episode, I wrote and read the Broadside where I talked about our trip to Colorado. And this isn't even what we were planning to talk about, but I guess I'll just throw it out there. In case you haven't heard, they have legalized cannabis in the state of Colorado.
I've heard something about that.
Yeah. Now, the state, near as I can tell, it has not burned to the ground. There does not appear to be a rash of crime or violence or poverty. What they do seem to have is a budget surplus.
You don't say.
You look at Nebraska, nope. You look at Iowa, nope. Colorado, yep, there they got one. It's almost like when you allow the free market and people to make individual choices and all of this. It's almost like when you do these things, good results happen. And when you try to crush them, people leave the fucking state. And guys, you could see a Kansas happen here, where you just have blue blood people like, hell man, I can afford to live someplace that doesn't fucking resemble a Soviet bloc country. Why don't I go live in Colorado? Why don't I go live in California? Why not live in Washington or Oregon or Montana or Alaska or wherever?
Why don't I live somewhere blue?
Yeah. Why don't I live somewhere where people are just cool?
Yep.
And they're not religious, they're not religious monsters who think that they need to regulate every aspect of people's personal and private lives.
Now, I can't imagine that this is the thinking, because I think it suggests far more forward thinking than I think our current legislation is capable of. But it's almost like you're intentionally trying to drive away the smart people. It's like you're trying to drive away the successful people and get them the hell out of your state. Okay, well, that's fantastic. Now you have a super red state. But you know what happens in most of the super red states? Look at the fucking South, okay? Look at Mississippi. Look at Alabama. Look at all those fucking hillbilly red states. And tell me that's what you want for Iowa?
The highest poverty rates, the worst teen pregnancy rates, the worst drug abuse rates. Some of this is where the opioid epidemic is hitting hardest.
In the most conservative fucking states.
Where you can't even get a rehab clinic because, that costs too much money.
Oh, and God forbid you get, either sex ed or contraceptives available to prevent those pregnancies.
Oh yeah, no, abstinence only, please. That's the way that science has shown is the best way to teach sex policy.
All of this goes back to what we've talked about countless times before, which is red policies hurt people. They just do. And in some cases, it seems almost fucking malicious and intentional.
In the case of the drug war, if we're just going to stick to that, it was.
Absolutely, sure.
And it was malicious. And the sooner people wake up and go, hey, wait a minute, we need to make sure that doesn't happen in our state. We are still trapped in that mode of thinking.
Yeah, because you know what happens when you legalize pot in Colorado? People move to fucking Colorado, and they open businesses selling pot and paying taxes and becoming civic members of the fucking society.
So we've got some friends out there, and basically their advice is if you're looking to move into Colorado, here's what you need to do. You're not going to have a hard time finding a job. That's the first thing they told us. I mean, they're not all going to pay an astounding amount of money, but there will be work to do because the economy is booming. What you do need to do is you need to make damn sure that you bring at least a couple of months worth of rent along so that when you're ready to buy housing, bam, you're right on top of it because it's not going to stay long. Do you think that that's the case in Iowa, or that will be the case going forward? Honey, where should we move? Oh, let's go to the place where I can't bargain for health care. Oh, let's go to the place where our kid can't make above $7.25 even if he's going to work 25 hours a week.
Let's go to the place where we're reducing the amount of money we're willing to spend on educating people.
Right. If I could just quickly mention, just anecdotally, there was an instance where this directly hit. I'm not going to exactly explain all the details, but there was a school system where associates for special needs kids had their hours reduced, and they had basically a walkout problem where a lot of people just left because they cut them almost down to part-time, where they just could not make enough money so that kids who need one-on-one help in a special needs setting or even in a general classroom setting, because of the budget cuts, that had to happen, or at least that's what the school board claimed had to happen. So this is not hypothetical, like, oh, I wonder if. No, this is real. This is already happening, and it's continuing.
Yeah, fuck them. They're special needs kids. Who cares? Except for the parents, the people who take care of them, the economy, industry around building either assistive devices or educational processes or, anything to improve somebody's life. Who gives a shit about that? Or
just the warm feeling you get doing something good every day.
Shut up. There's no money in that.
There's no money in feeling good.
No, there isn't.
Bombs.
I did mention when I talked about CASA, that's a fucking volunteer position.
Yep. Proud of you, buddy.
I get mileage, I guess, whatever that rate is. But that's neither here nor there. One of the things I found sort of interesting, though, when obviously I posted that editorial to the Facebook page for Swing State, but the people I associate with is no shortage of liberals, obviously. A lot of people posted the same editorial. And what I found sort of interesting were the comments that some people were making in regard to that, including one that was essentially, don't let the door catch you on the ass on the way out. Like, good. I'm glad you're fucking leaving Iowa.
Well, see where that attitude gets you. Are you a business person? You must not be a small business owner. You're telling a potential customer, go fuck
yourself.
Hit your ass on the way out.
But the same person also then proceeded to tell me all about what their education was like when they were going to school here in Iowa and how shitty it was, 50 fucking years ago or whatever it was. And I thought there were a couple of different things that I thought of with regard to that. One of them is, it was 50 fucking years ago. Every fucking thing about the state of Iowa was completely different. Not the least of which being, we were sort of in one of those phases where we can give a shit about education.
50 years ago, we still had basically an agriculture economy and a manufacturing economy, right? I mean, so education, you didn't have one, you just graduated high school, fine. Go down to the meat plant and chop heads off of cows for a living wage.
The importance of education was very different. You could get by with a high school education or not even high school education. You can't now. But the secondary thing, and this sort of ties back into what we were talking about in the first segment, was this is what's known as an anecdote. This is somebody's evidence for their position. If you were to tell him, well, I think it's great they should leave, and here's the evidence why, because they have it so much better now. That's what's known as an anecdote. It is not evidence. And the more anecdotes you have does not make more evidence. The more people who tell you that they saw Bigfoot in this area does not increase the likelihood that Bigfoot is real.
Well, and in this particular instance, I mean, if the argument is I had a shitty education and turned out okay, therefore this generation of humans that's being born now in the information age can do without an education.
Yeah, no.
That is asinine.
That's just it. We have more access to information than we ever had before, and it is more important than ever before. But the thinking of people involved hasn't changed.
Yeah, and that kind of is a good episode theme right there, right?
Yeah, because this guy, his experience is what he knows, and he has not explored it any further. That's great. He's making decisions and making statements like, too bad, get the fuck out then, without any real reason for doing it. Do you remember those dumbass quarters, the commemorative state quarters that they were doing? Every state had their own quarter, and it had this weird-ass design.
Yeah, I think my grandpa bought me a board, and I failed him in putting it together over the years.
Same thing. The one for Iowa has a one-room schoolhouse. And the reason they selected that coin was to symbolize how Iowa valued education. That, and I think it also is based on a Grant Wood painting, and we love to talk about how great anybody even remotely associated with Iowa is. But ostensibly, the reason for choosing that was to symbolize Iowa's dedication to education. And now look at where we are. We have budget cuts to the schools. We have people like this teacher who are leaving. So maybe you'll find a teacher to replace him, but maybe that teacher doesn't have the same level of education, doesn't have the same dedication, whatever.
We know the governor of Minnesota has gone on record saying that they're going to be trying to poach Iowa teachers now because of the collective bargaining bullshit.
Sure.
So we are now in a hyper competition era. So places like, let's say, northern Iowa, up there towards Minnesota or whatever, people from that college, one of the better teaching colleges in the state, they get done with their degree. They were educated in Iowa public schools. They went to Northern Iowa University on in-state tuition. And when they're done with their education, are they going to turn around and stay in the state of Iowa and be productive here?
Fuck no.
Fuck no. I'm going to Colorado. I'm going to Minnesota. I'm going anywhere but Kansas Part 2. So I guess as a way to kind of bring this all to a close, this right here, this article is just one example of the consequences of when you align yourself with the informationally deficient folk in the country. The people who think that Bill O'Reilly and Rush Limbaugh and these folks are speaking some mystical truth about the state of the country, even though they are absolutely opposed to scientific reasoning and fact and every other line of logic that you can apply. They seem to be wrong continually about everything and do little but project their own flaws onto other people. It sucks to have to read stuff like this. I guess that when I saw the headline, I just kind of got like a little, like just a little sag in the spirit where you're like, I understand, wanting to leave a state that's doing nothing for you. That's a part of the free market. We have a market of states too. And in this global economy, we have a market of countries. So Iowa needs to quickly get its head out of its ass and start deciding that we're going to be, like we have certain good things going, the wind energy capital. Yep. We're going to be the education capital. We're not going to be letting Colorado take our pot money capital. Many, many issues could quickly turn this around in 2018. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But until next time, keep your chin up.
And as always, organize, mobilize, protest,
vote.